let me show you a little bit of some of the comparisons and some of the reporting, and then we'll get to your questions at the end here. So one thing is, as I said, none of the reporting functions are available yet. So I'm going to switch over to last year, 2017. So if I don't apply any filters, this is going to give me data for every institution that participated last year. So as you can see, that's an average per question of 143. Now there's between 150 and 160 institutions total, but on average for each of these data points, there are 143 responses to it. Now, if I want to start narrowing that down, you've got all of these filtering options that are available. So I can select whatever makes sense for my institution. We're a small institution and we're public. So I want to make sure to point out here, as you're selecting these options, these numbers at the bottom start to change, right? So at this point, there are 12 accounts that meet this criteria. So there are only 12 institutions from last year that are small and public. Which means that I'm probably not going to get good comparisons. So I may not want to use those filters. So if I take off public, now I'm back up to 52 small institutions. So that's a much better comparison. Probably don't want to include medical schools since we don't have one. So that dropped it down to 51, which is still a good comparison. We're not in a system, so filter out the system schools. Now I'm at 45. So, you know, there you can begin to see how you might change these filters to get to a point that you feel like you've got a good number of institutions to compare to, but they're also at most like who you are as an institution. Now, one thing that you can do is you also can self-define how you want some of these. So, you know, based on size, if you're a 5,000 student institution, maybe that's the most important thing to you is size. So set a filter between 4,000 and 8,000 or something like that, so that you get the right size institutions. So there are a number of ways that you can filter. And then the last way is you can create your own peer cluster if that's what you want. So I already know the 10 or 12 or 20 institutions that are identical to my institution across the country. Those are the ones that I want to compare myself to. You can do that if they've participated. So I've defined a couple of clusters here. I have one for all the Arkansas institutions. I have one for all SACUBO institutions. So you can cluster any way that you want to for institutions that are in the database. So I'm going to leave this at, I'm going to take off the small and include publics, single campus, no medical school. So that puts it at 58, and that's a pretty good number of institutions to compare to. So you get all the same statistics. So all of these change based on the filters that you've applied. So in this case, only 17% considered themselves small, 26% are community colleges. So, you know, maybe this is not the right comparison for my institution. I might want to go back and change that, but just so we can look at it, I'm going to leave it at that. And then you can see, so my institution, our responses are in red. So we outsource our bookstore, custodial, dining, facilities, and grounds. So to see how I compare to spending at the institutions I've selected, I can see how many of them are like us. So 60% of the selected institutions have their bookstore outsourced. So 67% have their dining services outsourced. A much smaller percentage have facilities, grounds, and custodial outsourced. So maybe I want to change the filters so that I'm accounting for that, so that the types of expenses look more like my expenses, and that's something that definitely can be done. So that's some of the demographic data, and then every data point that was entered now becomes a comparison. So just a really quick view of what do I look like compared to the institutions I just selected. So for example, size, my institution in this comparison group, we're one of the smallest. We're only at the 20th percentile, which is another reason why this may not be the best comparison for me. I probably wouldn't use this. Graduation rate, we have one of the lowest. Retention rate, we have one of the lowest, but again, that's not unusual, as you saw in the data I showed you earlier. Um, and then there are financial details also available in this just general comparison. So you can start to see what does my revenue look like compared to everyone else. Appropriations, we're at the 27th percentile, net tuition and fees, 24th percentile. So right off the bat, I can tell we are pretty significantly under-resourced compared to these 58 institutions that I'm trying to compare myself to. So this really isn't a good comparison. Um, and then you can go through all of these data points. There's something that jumps out. We discount much more heavily than these institutions in this comparison.